bet on yourself. I think that every single person, whether you realize it or not, has had a $1 million idea or a fantastic idea. The problem is that people feel apprehensive about quitting what's comfortable and their day-to-day to actually focus 100% on this idea.
Everybody, this is Devin Miller here, and I have another great episode today of the Inventive Journey. For you, those of you that are new to the podcast, I'm Devin Miller. I'm the host of the Inventive Journey. I am a patent and trademark attorney and founded Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks to help protect and grow their business. Also a serial entrepreneur, so loved working with and talking with other startups. So today we on the podcast we have a great guest, which is Rachel, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself as far as starting her business now. And she lives in Silicon Valley, but never thought of herself as doing a startup or getting in that realm. So we'll have a great episode, and welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you on. So why don't you go ahead and we'll jump in, and why don't you tell the listenership and the viewership a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you started out?
Sure. Yeah. So like you mentioned, I never really imagined right in college or right after college being an entrepreneur or owning my own business. I didn't even know that that was really an option in my realm of reality. I thought, well, there are only a few things you can do, like doctor, lawyer, business teacher, engineer, and I was going to go into business. So I studied economics and math, went into finance, sort of like everyone else.
We got to, I know we just barely got started, but we got to, so Silicon Valley is always known for the startup, and it's almost the hub of startup, so to speak. And then you would have, and I don't watch it much, but I'll have a whole bunch of friends. So you have the Silicon Valley TV show. It's about, startups, and, that's where you had an Apple and you had so how did you, with all of that going on, just never even dawned on you to do a startup? I just always, it seems like you should have had at least that exposure to it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe it was just living in a bubble, going to Santa Clara University, and they had like really specific economic or academic tracks for you. But I think it was more along the lines, in 2006 when I started college, I don't think like starting your own company wasn't like the hot buzz, right? When people were going to college, I think they would work for these big tech companies like Apple or Google or, Facebook a little bit at the time. But they would work as an employee there. I don't think there was this buzz and overall excitement around starting your own company. And startups at that time weren't really hiring people right out of college. I mean, I think now it's a lot more common. But back then, that was almost like 14 years ago, which is crazy. Now it's 2020. It was a lot more common for people to graduate and then work at a larger institution or, go into investment banking or the Big Four for accounting. And if you were going to work for a tech company, it was an engineer or you're working in the finance department. So I think it was like, these are just big powerhouses, but it never really dawned on me to like start my own venture. But that could just be my own naivety, and like the way that I kind of operated at that point was a little bit more sheltered. So I can't really give you a good explanation, but that was a really good question.
No, I just thought it was interesting because that's whenever anybody thinks of like the startup hub of the world, hopefully is you, Todd. We got some startups. But ask most people, where do all the startups go? And it's always the California, at least on the technology side. So didn't want to derail it too much, but thought that was an interesting point. So so you went into asset management, so we can kind of keep going along your journey and tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I started out at a firm, a small boutique firm in the city. It was one of those where you're working 100+ hours a week, but you're learning a ton. So that was great. And during that time, I realized that the huge value that was being generated for all of these clients in their portfolio was really from these entrepreneurs and operative geniuses that were starting companies, growing them to something meaningful, and then having some type of high value exit, whether it was an IPO or an acquisition or something. I think it really dawned on me when I was looking at a transaction with Instagram. So there was a firm that invested in Instagram just days before they were acquired from Facebook. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. All these people are realizing a ton of value, but it's really the founders of Instagram that built this fantastic platform. And now it's so widely used in terms of the world of social media. So I figured, wow, that's where I want to be, is like, that's the end goal for me. This is where like all the value, kind of starts, and you can really be disruptive in that way. So, traditionally in the finance path, what you do is you go on to private equity, venture capitalism, or equities and trading. And so I was going to interview for private equity and VC firms as an associate. And so when I would go in there, I actually sort of, a little bit manipulated the situation. I would go in there and I would do the interview for the associate role, but then midway through, I would start to pitch them on my idea. Like, oh, wait, so are you here for the associate role, or are you trying to pitch us on your product? I was like, oh, well, both. If either is an option, I'll take either one of those paths. And the feedback that I got from all of these places was really valuable and actually kind of changed my trajectory. And they basically said to me, we love the spirit.
But we gotta stop there, because you blew past. At least it's the first time I've heard of the idea. Let's go for a job interview, but really the job interview is to see, I got some ideas I'd like to pitch you. So first of all, kudos to you, because I think that's a great way to get in front of them, which probably is a lot harder if you were just trying to try and pitch your idea, because they're probably a little bit more closed door. So was it well received? Did they like that? Did they say, oh, that's an innovative way to get in front of us? Or they say that, almost a bait and switch type of a thing?
No, they thought it was brilliant. I think that was like when the interview was going down a particular path, and then everyone was like, well, what do you want to do in 5 years? Where do you see for yourself? And I was like, actually, Jim, Joe.
Great question.
Let me just pull out this pitch deck that I happen to have with me. And they're like, oh, that's hilarious. They thought it was really funny and inspiring. And they actually loved the energy that I brought to the meeting, because they could tell that I was super passionate about it, right? It's like the first questions are all kind of the same, like, walk me through a discounted cash flow, explain to you know what I mean? They're like pretty mechanical. And then you usually have some kind of more technical test, and then it's kind of a conversation. So during the conversation, and I kind of switched the conversation, like, hey, look at my pitch deck. They loved it. I think like,
you're kind of just waiting for that. What do you want to do with your life, or where do you see you in 5 years, or, what's your career aspect? You're like, great question. And then you just completely jump over to where you want.
I don't even know how I had the audacity to do that at that point in my life. It just like sort of came to me. I was like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pitch my idea, because I thought, what's the worst that can happen, right? They say, no, we can't. And you're right. I wouldn't have been able to get in front of them otherwise. I was a single founder. I had no tech skills. I wasn't an engineer. My idea was okay. And I also had no business experience. Like, I don't even think the like entry admin who's reviewing applications would have even looked at that, at my resume for more than 2 seconds. Like, so it was a creative in my mind to get in front of these people.
Give me kudos to it. We'll have to use that as a way for people to get in front of VCs and angels. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So before we'll jump into more of your journey, the last question, I know it's a bit of a rabbit hole. So what was your favorite idea that you pitched in the middle of an interview?
Sure. Yeah. So the idea that I came to all of the VCs with was an application called Weddily. It's a wedding planning application. And this was like before Zola, right? Like this was before a lot of these current wedding planning and event planning applications really took off. And I kind of had this platform. I was like, everyone can collaborate, you can plan together, and it'll be a platform to connect vendors with people. So it's kind of like Thumbtack meets Zola meets a bunch of other platforms, like syndicated in one, plus, maybe mint.com and a budget element. And they're like, there's a lot going on here and you don't know how to program. So I love the idea in theory, but this is probably not going to work for you. But that was my favorite idea.
All right. Well, I think it's a good. Apparently, others thought it was a good idea because you've had the others that have come along since and done some of the similar things. So you got that feedback, and that almost takes you to the next part of your journey, right? You got the feedback. Hey, thanks for applying. We'll think about it, and also thanks for pitching. but then you got the feedback of, you need a bit more technical background or technical understanding or ability to be able to manage some of that. So then what did you do with that feedback?
Yeah, I said, okay, well, I'm going to do just that, because if I come back here in 5 years, I want to be able to say I did what you said and what you requested. So I went to work at Salesforce, which was like a really, really great big tech company in Silicon Valley. And at the time was a little bit earlier on in their journey. So now I think it's like 75,000 people. Back then it was only, 5,000 people when I was working there. I worked in their finance and strategy department. It was a great opportunity. I was able to work closely with the two CFOs who were there at my time there, and kind of saw how the company ran at a 50,000 foot level, right? Like helped with setting guidance, earnings reports, what was working well operationally, where were we inefficient, what could we do differently, how could we budget to really hit our financial goals, kind of everything at a really top level view. But I realized I still didn't have any technical experience. So, working at salesforce.com and seeing how low customer churn is, it kind of inspired me to learn how to build programs on the force.com application, because it's such a sticky product. So then I learned Apex, JavaScript, Python, and SQL, because I wanted to learn how to pull data from the system and analyze it as well. And then, Salesforce.com, for their employees, they offer admin and developer classes. So you can take those for free, pending you can work out a time with your boss to actually take a break from work and go to the classes. So I started doing that and really loved it. I really liked programming and building custom applications and automating processes. That was super interesting to me. And then what happened was, I started to answer questions just within my network. People would call me and say, hey, you work at Salesforce. I started at this company, there's 20 of us, super small. We're trying to figure out how to automatically route leads. Do you know how to do that? And I'd say, oh yeah, I learned that yesterday in class. I was like, I literally just learned how to do this, but let me just try for free to help you out and see what we can automate. And I started doing that just sort of in my spare time, like nights and weekends, right? And at the same time, my colleague and co-founder, Greg Dowley, was working at a company called AdRoll, and he was building out the business intelligence group. So he was working with their database, analyzing large sets of data and figuring out really how to strategically invest in different parts of the business based on data. And so he would be answering the same questions for his network, like, hey, we just got a new round of funding and my CEO wants to know how much we're going to need for sales versus marketing and why. I don't know how to do that. Like, can you help us? And so he was doing the same thing. And then we kind of came together and were like, we should probably charge for this. And, it took us a while to really quit our full-time jobs, which I think was a mistake. I think we should have done it sooner, but we eventually did. And that's how we founded Claris Designs, which is a sales and marketing consulting company, which is what I currently do today. So we started out there. We grew our client base pretty big. We were doing kind of like a range of projects, building custom applications for them, doing data and analysis. And then I went to work full-time for a company called Snowflake. So they had a great opportunity to work, in-house and really get exposure to a fast-growing company. What I realized about Claris is that it was fantastic, but I really wanted to see how these solutions that we were giving to companies would actually evolve and mature over time, because as a consultant, you parachute in and then you hop right out and you don't really get to see how they evolve. So I had a great opportunity. Someone in my network said, listen, there's this great company. It has a great product. But at this point in time, we don't have that many people thinking about how to build the business from an operational perspective. Like, it's the perfect fit for you. And if you really want to see high growth in a tech company, I promise you, like, this thing is about to take off. So in, October 2017, I started in sales ops with the one other analyst and the VP at the time. We grew about 30 account executives, and only 3 people in sales ops. And then we grew the team to over 40 people in sales ops. At one point, 22 or 23 people reported to me. And then we went from 30 AEs to, 400 AEs in a really short amount of time, like about 2 years. So And then I recently,
But I'm going to, before you jump on the next point, I'm going to dive in just a little bit deeper. So on that, so you had started Claris Designs and then jump back over to the startup. And what was the decision? What made you, I don't, maybe you can share a bit of the time, but you have you decided just to jump out, start on your own, do your consulting, and then you have the startup that you're or somebody else's startup. And what made you decide to go and join their startup as opposed to keep pushing things, or were you trying to juggle both at the same time? Or how did that work as far as, you got one thing that you wanted to start, you also want to be involved with other startups and see how they implement things. So tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for me, I hadn't really worked at a fast growing startup from 0 to 100 before. I'd worked at Salesforce, which was already a, $1 billion plus in revenue company, and saw how something that's established in public works. But I didn't actually have the experience myself on, okay, we are at, 10 million in revenue. We want to get to 100 million, or, 5 to 20, or I hadn't actually lived that experience myself. And I was consulting companies on how to do that for them. And I realized, gosh, I'm missing something in my own background and my own skill set that will really help take Claris eventually to the next level. So for me, I figured, Claris is only going to reach a certain threshold given the experience that Greg and I have. And I think this was an opportunity for me to add more tools to my belt, so to speak, and get really good experience that I knew in the long run for Claris would be much more beneficial for the business. So it's more of a long-term play. I figured, Greg and then the other people that we hired were going to be able to run the business while I wasn't there. And we'd set it up so it was pretty efficient. And I knew that these were skills that, like I mentioned, in the long run would be the best for the business, and then for my personal development and overall career trajectory.
Oh, cool. So if I were to hit almost a common theme, it's kind of as you progressed. So when you originally went to the VCs, they said you need more of a tech background, or you need to understand the tech better. So then you went and got the tech, and then you started your startup and said, okay, now I need this skill set they don't have, of being able to see how they grow it, how they do operations, how they do the full implementation, go from 5 million to 100 million or whatever that would be. So you went out and got that skill set as well. So it's kind of as you go along, figuring out what you don't know or the skill sets that you're going to need, and then figuring out how to acquire those skills.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think that has been my MO for the past, 10 years that I've been working in this field. So that's really what guides me. And I think as I continue to grow and expand, it's how do you continue to get these skills efficiently, or, hire for your gaps and your weaknesses, and really bring on people who can help, support you from a personnel perspective. But yeah, that's a correct summary.
I'd say this, I've done some of the same thing with my career. And I always joke is that, attorneys give great legal advice and they give horrible business advice, because they get the in and outs of legal, and yet they very seldom, and I guess I call myself an exception, but most of the time attorneys have never run a business. They've never been part of a startup. They've never seen how you make payroll or how you budget for IP or patents or trademarks or anything else. And so you always get great legal advice, and they say, well, why don't you go and spend $10,000 to do all this IP work? And they're saying, because we're a startup and we only have $20,000 to get everything launched, and we can't put half of our budget. And so it's one of those. And so I kind of get that same idea of, that's why it's been interesting, is I've done both, I do the legal side and help others, but I've done a few of my own startups, founded them, continue to run them and do that. You get a much different perspective, and it gives you an ability to give people a lot better advice, to give them a lot better feedback, and to make decisions, rather than just having one siloed thing to say, now I get where you're at, I get how you guys have done it. And so yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective, and one that I think too often we get so specialized, and specialized is great, but we miss out on skill sets that would also help us to be better.
Yeah, I agree. I think the lived experience of going through that hyper growth at Snowflake is one that you can't just study, right? Academically, and you have living it and actually being there and having conversations with the current CRO and, my VP at the time and the CEO, and okay, we're going to hire these people. Now, where do we put them? Okay, now this is our goal. What do we do? It's just stuff I couldn't have even really imagined having to think through on the fly. It was like the best learning experience for me. Like it was such a great experience. So yeah, I'm really fortunate for that time.
Okay, so now having covered all that, we'll get to where you're actually at today. So tell us just a little bit about what you're doing today. And so you went and worked for Snowflake, and if I remember based on our conversation, you're now no longer with them. You're now back to doing your own thing. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm back to running Claris full time as a couple months ago, which is great. So after having that fantastic experience at Snowflake, I really felt confident, like, okay, now I want to go back to running this business that I have and really growing it to a level that wouldn't have been possible before. So Claris Designs, we have two main product offerings. We do sales and marketing, operations and analytics consulting. So how do you set up your processes to get the right data that you need? And then how do you analyze that data to make the best decision for the business? And then we also have an outsourcing division. So we help offload a lot of the manual day-to-day data entry that most people don't necessarily want to spend time doing, to free them up to focus on other high value activities or tasks. And we hire and employ over 70 people in the Philippines that work on these tasks, and it's quite a large part of the business. So I never would have imagined that being such a large part of our business. So that's really cool to see how well we've grown there. And then the third piece is we're developing our own technology. So we're looking to build an application on the Salesforce.com platform and automate a lot of the things that we do as consultants when we come in and assess a startup's current CRM system or environment on their processes. So that's what I'm doing now. I think my biggest goal is to grow our outsourcing revenue to a certain threshold, and then develop our product so we can, launch at the end of this year. That's our goal. That's how I'm spending my time.
Well, that sounds like a great way to spend your time.
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna ask one question that I was dying to, or I was interested to know, and I'm sure the audience will be or find it interesting. You're dying to know. So you now have done your own. You're now in your own startup. You've been doing it for a bit of time. Originally, or way back when we touched a little bit earlier, you pitched in front of VCs and angels and that. Did you ever go back to them and say, now I've got my tech skills, now I've actually done this, and now invest in the new startup? Or did you, by that time, you already passed it and you already had the ability to start it without needing to go to angel or venture?
Yeah, Claris has been a really lucky and fortunate situation. We've never had to take outside funding. We've bootstrapped 100%. It's more the nature of our business model. With consulting, if you can find engagements in business, you make money from the beginning. There were definitely weeks and months in the early years where I didn't take a paycheck and I was eating ramen for every meal. So that was a little bit challenging. But I think if Greg and I were to ever build Weddily, like I was talking about, the original idea that we pitched, I would probably go back to those same people and say, hey, listen, do you remember this idea? I tweaked it a little bit. I still think it's viable. We need, we want to pitch you on investing. So hopefully that's an option that I have in my back pocket. But yeah, for Claris, we've never had to take outside funding, which is really fortunate.
Cool. Well, no, that's great to know. Okay. I always have my two last questions. So question before my two last questions. Will you ever go back and actually do the wedding app or wedding startup? Is that you always, because I always look at, and I have some companies that I always thought would be a great idea, and I still think they are, and I always say someday I'll go back to them. Someday I still want to do that, and it'll be great. And other times I look back and say that was a really dumb idea. I don't know why I spent so much time and effort on it. It would have never worked. But now, knowing now what I know today versus back then, so kind of where did that startup end up, or will you ever see yourself going back to it?
I think potentially, yes. I think that maybe in a couple years, and I think I'll probably tweak the idea. It won't be the exact same one, but after we build our product with Claris, I think I'll have a lot more understanding, like the skills that we're talking about, on what that actually entails, going from zero to something and developing it with an engineering team, working with product, working with clients, getting customer feedback. Like that whole experience and journey, I'm not as well versed in yet. I think once we launch the product, depending on how it goes, it'll be successful or a huge flop, but you'll learn either way. I think I'll have much more of a foundation to then go back to that idea and build something. So I want to say there's like an 80% chance I do it, but yeah, I don't know for sure. But my hope is that yes, we do something similar to it.
All right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that was a fun to walk through your journey. And as we kind of wind down the podcast for this episode, I always have the two questions I ask at the end, and so I'll ask you as well. So the first question is what was the worst business decision you ever made?
Right. Okay. Worse. Gosh. So I failed a lot. I think that's the best way for me to learn is to just continuously make mistakes and then bounce back from them. But I think that the worst business decision I ever made was around hiring. I would say that for a business, your number one asset is your personnel, are the employees that you bring on board, especially in the early phases of a business. They become basically like your family because you're working with these people around the clock. I mean, starting a business isn't easy. It requires a lot of late nights. And I think there were times when we were desperate to get work done. And we hadn't put effort and thought into recruiting and building a pipeline of candidates and building a training program so that when people were brought on, they had an effective environment to learn and grow within. So we kind of just like brought on people that we thought could fill a gap. And it didn't work out very well. So I think like really making sure that you are putting a lot of time into building a pipeline of people, interviewing those people, making sure that it's a good fit for you just as it is for them. It's a two-way street. And then really investing in those people when they're there and making sure that they grow and develop into the person that you know that they can be. Taking like such a serious approach and investing in that, just like you would growing your revenue or hitting your targets, is something that I didn't do in the beginning that was horrible. And now I've completely changed my perspective on it.
And I'm in agreement. And that's when I think no matter how great you think you're going to be at hiring, it's always a hard one. I mean, it's kind of, as a startup or, if you're an entrepreneur or you're in the startup and that, you always think that everybody's going to work as hard as you will. They'll do as great of a job. And it's not, and it's a much different thing when you're actually running the business and that to say, well, no, not everybody is in this and they'll work 20 hours, or a 20-hour day and get things done and that because they're in it. They're, while they'll do a good job or they may do a good job, they got a wife, they got a family, they got kids, and they're in it for the job and the paycheck, and they want to do a good job. But it's a much different perspective, and it's always kind of interesting to learn on that, particularly on hiring, as to how you find those people that that will do the good job, and then also learning a bit yourself as to what is a realistic expectation. Okay, second question is if you're getting someone that wanted to get into startups, maybe do a small business and get things going, what advice would you give them? What would be your number one piece of advice?
Right. So that's a good question. I would say bet on yourself. I think that every single person, whether you realize it or not, has had a $1 million idea or a fantastic idea. The problem is that people feel apprehensive about quitting what's comfortable and their day-to-day to actually focus 100% on this idea. For me personally, with Claris, I would say that things were sort of petering along while I was trying to balance both at Salesforce and at Claris, and then they just skyrocketed once I could focus all of my attention on that one thing. And it's scary. But try to take that risk and really bet on yourself, because I promise you, no matter what happens, it will be a fantastic learning experience. Either you're going to do really well, in which case that's the best case, that's a wonderful case scenario, or you're going to fail, but you're going to learn so much. So really bet on yourself, believe in yourself, and take that risk, because that's really where I think, great personal growth and business ideas really develop.
All right. Well, I think those are both learn how to hire and avoid that mistake, and also betting on yourself and making that leap and having confidence, because I agree. A lot of people have great ideas, and it's usually the difference between execution and actually doing the idea versus always thinking, oh, I should have done that. So great pieces of advice. Thank you again for coming on. As we wrap up, how do people, if they want to either use your services or reach out or hear more about you or make connections, any of the above, what's the best way for them to connect up with you?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So if you go to our website, which is www.clarisdesigns.com, you can learn all about us. You can hear the background on all the founders. And then there's also a contact us form, and we'll respond to that within at least 24 hours if you want to learn more, or reach out to one of us individually.
All right, great. Well, we will certainly make sure to direct everybody your way. So good luck with your ongoing journey. For everybody else that's listening, if you want to come on and tell your journey on the podcast, you can just go to Inventive Journey and apply to be on the podcast. And for those of you that may need help along your journey with patents and trademarks, feel free to reach out to us. We're always here to help and to make sure that we can be there along your journey to make sure it's a successful one. So thank you again, Rachel, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I always want to talk more and have more things to hit on than we ever have time, but it's been fun to hear your journey, and it will be, hopefully we can have you on again sometime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.